In this video, we are going to dive into Chapek's legacy in regards to the parks. What can he do? What should he do? What will he do? What can Chapek do to kind of bolster his legacy in regard to these theme parks? We're going to dive into it up next. Hey everybody, welcome aboard to another episode of Orange Grove 55. We're talking Chapek's legacy in regards to theme parks. I brought my good friend, collaborator, Mr. Vasky, on with me to discuss this. Dre, how are you doing today, sir?
I am doing very, very well. Doing very, very good. This was when you rang me up and said, "Hey, you want to do this topic?" I mean, I really had to think about it because I was like, "Man, what am I going to say here?" But I think I've got a line here that's going to be really, really good, and I think our viewers will appreciate. Best place to get in touch with me, interact with me. Love the DM chats. It's going to be at Vash Scott. It's going to be right down here, right like it's spelled. At Vash Sky, and the best place to see me, well, is on your channel, the channel that you're actually watching, Orange Grove 55, at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. We're all set, ready to go. So I do want to say right out the gate, to kind of set the table here, I was watching Fresh Baked, the Fresh Baked podcast, specifically with Dave and Ron Berner. They had a fantastic conversation. I will be linking that down below in the description. But to set the table, I'm going to play a short clip from their show. And at the end of that, on the other end of that video, we'll go ahead and discuss it. Here we go.
Totally agree with that. He's definitely the business side of things. I only say those things because I think he needs something on his watch, theme park related. What does that look like?
Yeah, he's been getting burned for years. I would be sick of it too, man. I would want to win.
No, I'm only saying that because Eisner. Go down the list. Roy, next guy, the next guy did Tokyo and Epcot. Then Eisner had Euro Disney, which is a colossal failure, but then he did Paris, and he did every single CEO at Disney has a legacy of significant in the theme park space. But you want to know why I say legacy? Because the one thing that lives forever, essentially, is what happens in the theme park. All those other things you do can go by the wayside easily.
No, that's true.
They can be sold. Yeah. Can be sold off. Theme parks have they just last. It has lasting, enduring power. So it just got me thinking, Chapek is going to do something. And
I had not considered that as a possibility, but you make a good point. But I know that they have a bunch of cash on hand, actually, which is another point. You'd think that their inability to create revenue may hinder their ability to expand parks, that kind of thing, because they don't want to spend a bunch of money and go into more debt, this kind of thing. I mean, they do owe debt. They owe, but they've also got cash on hand. Yeah. So there is a possibility. Yeah, they might. If they, the only thing is, I don't think it's going to be stateside. Like, where would you build another park?
I don't think it'll be stateside either, because again, it's about expansion. It's about moving. Yeah. It's going like Germany, even though they have the second biggest theme park in the world is there, or the second biggest theme park company is in the world there. Yeah, I forget what they're called. I don't know at all. I'm just saying. Everybody else opened a theme park. Does he want to be the guy that says, you know what? All 6 of them, my friend. I think. I might need to fact check myself. Well, Ronald Miller was...
Does he even count?
No, he doesn't count. I was going to say, he was a wife. He was only there for a year, so he doesn't count. Yeah. So if you don't count him, and then the other guy was only there for like 5 or 6 years. But I'm just saying, I just threw out he'd open his own new theme park because in my head it just seemed like everybody else did, so why wouldn't he? And I don't know. I definitely think in the cards something big is going to happen because he's definitely making big changes. And don't even count Disneyland Forward because in 30 years he will not be here. So I don't know.
Okay, so interesting. interesting stuff there. Interesting stuff there. So overall, Ron was basically saying like, look, Chapek wants to put his fingerprint on the company. And anytime you've ever everyone's worked a job, right? Where you get a new manager and the new manager wants to put their fingerprint on, the company or the division or the unit. They always come in with big changes and big things, right?
Right.
And Chapek, basically what Ron is saying is basically Chapek is going to do that. He's going to come in and he's going to want to put his fingerprint and have some sort of legacy with the Walt Disney Company. And the way to do that is through like a new park, maybe internationally or what have you. But Dre, you heard the clip, you saw the clip. What are your overall feelings on this whole kind of notion?
It's interesting. I think Ron is working on the assumption that Chapek is motivated by the same things that maybe the previous CEOs were motivated by, and that he's in a similar vein as them. And I don't think that's the case. This is the first time that we've had a CEO come from the theme park space.
That's true.
We never really had that before. Everybody else has been kind of studio guys and studio driven in their mindset and philosophy. So that, when I think legacy, you can look at legacy, two ways. One is kind of what the person views as their legacy. And, opposite to that, you have what maybe the public views as their legacy. And those things, sometimes, many times they kind of go hand in hand, but sometimes they're not quite what they are. I think like Bob Iger, for example, he kind of viewed Shanghai Disneyland as his legacy. And honestly, he viewed it so much that he was originally going to retire right after that, right after it opened, which, because he kind of felt that he had reached that top. He had reached that apex where I'd handled so many of Michael Eisner's issues, overcame them, put the company in a better financial position, invigorated the brands and so forth. And this is the kind of apex. This is my legacy. In this is the one park that I've kind of designed and built from the ground up, right? Instead of just working over Michael Eisner's previous parks, as he was so accustomed to doing. But with Chapek, it's and I bring this up because it's like Chapek's kind of been there, done that in a way, I think for his legacy when it comes to that space was really, I think, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I think it may have been Epcot had things been different, but I think that's kind of where it is. It's interesting. Iger does interviews in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Bob Chapek does interviews in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. They're really proud of that space that they have created. And I think that's for him in the theme park space. I think that's where his legacy was at, when he was in that position. Does that necessarily translate to kind of the CEO space? I'm not sure, but I was really thinking about like, man, what could really solidify his legacy in this space? And I think, maybe like like if other circumstances, outside circumstances weren't a thing, right? And let's say Dave was right, where they have cash on hand, which I don't know where he's getting that number from, but okay, they have cash on hand. Maybe you could, I don't know, maybe a third gate in either Disneyland or a fifth gate in Walt Disney World.
Right.
Internationally, they've really talked to two big places, Brazil or India. Like that's really the two countries that are like, they have an emerging middle class. They have, they have a kind of a tourist business that can support a gate, right? Those are the two ones that I keep hearing. But I think the one thing that people aren't thinking about, maybe the Marvel theme park rights is the legacy. Maybe. That is one thing that Iger himself could not do. And that wouldn't just provide like a new land or a new space physically, but would provide a revenue stream, which I think Bob Chapek is much more interested in for the domestic parks that they might not have right now. And I think that might be, keep an eye on that, and I have more thoughts on that. But go ahead, OG. I've been talking long enough.
No. Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff here. In terms of like, look, if Chapek is going to go the route of his predecessors, where he's going to start a new resort for the Walt Disney Company, I don't know. I think Australia would actually be a great place for a new Disney park.
Yeah.
It definitely checks all the boxes. It has nice weather. I mean, it's hot, it works. There's no, it's not freezing cold all year or anything like that. And it has a great tourism market. I think Australia would be actually very, very cool because Australia definitely has this like, that you can definitely do a lot with that kind of personality with the kangaroos and I'm saying with Disney. I think you can definitely make a Disney park as unique to Australia. That would be very, very cool.
Yeah.
But I agree with you though. I don't necessarily think another park is where it's at for his legacy. And I don't necessarily feel like it's necessary. Like, okay, like even if Chapek is sort of, he wants to use the parks to sort of solidify his legacy. I think there's a lot of alternate routes he can go with the parks that don't include a third park or a fifth gate or anything like that, or even a new resort internationally.
Right.
Chapek, like you mentioned earlier, he was very proud of Galaxy's Edge, and he should be. Yeah. But also like things like the Star Cruiser. These ancillary themed experiences, right? Yeah. Where Disney sort of, and Chapek really spearheaded this whole sort of innovative approach to Disney hotels, which is what it is. They're trying to say it's a cruise line. I get it. But it's very much an innovative kind of way of a hotel, for Disney and sort of like giving them that new experience. I think Chapek will be all about these ancillary themed experiences. I think we'll see a lot more Star Cruiser type of thing where it's themed. Yeah, it's in the same family as theme parks, but it's not a theme park.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So I wouldn't be surprised if like Las Vegas or other places in the country start seeing these sort of like Star Cruiser kind of experiences, these kind of mini theme parks, these kind of mini cruise lines sort of things. That might be something that might be Chapek's legacy,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
it's on the table. No, yeah, I think something like that is definitely on the table because look, while I would love to see a third park at Disneyland, and that's not off the table for me at all. I think that's a possibility because a Toy Story lot is definitely big enough to hold a park.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's the only option necessarily for Chapek. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. No, I totally agree. And that's why I said, circumstances, not being what they are, right? Because obviously these things don't happen in a vacuum. You have to be more realistic with your goals. Right. Disney, a fifth gate or a third gate domestically on any of the respective resorts, that's a long way off, honestly. And it's, these parks, Animal Kingdom, Disney California Adventure, even Disneyland in some respects, but certainly Disney's Hollywood Studios, they have growth there. There are opportunities for growth within them. So to add gates, like you said, I think Chapek is much more interested than maybe we all. That conversation gets wrapped up in like, got to solidify his legacy, with a gate, and it's like not necessarily, like you said, OG. I mean, it's like I think Chapek is much more interested in being maybe innovative, and finding new revenue streams that didn't previously exist. I think that's really for himself what he considers to be his legacy. And like I said, that might not jive with the public perception of what a legacy should be or what it is or whatever. But I think in Chapek's mind, I think that's where we're going. We're seeing like talk of the Metaverse. We're seeing talk of this kind of living Disney concept or whatever. Like this, I think this is where he's going.
Completely. Absolutely. And look, Chapek is not a popular guy amongst theme park fans.
Oh, yeah.
But whether you hate the guy or love the guy, there's no denying the guy definitely wants to change the game.
Yeah.
He definitely wants to, kind of cause a stir. He wants to be disruptive in terms of this stuff. He doesn't want to really do the status kind of quo. And again, you don't have to like the approach or the product he's trying to sell, but he's definitely not a riding on coattails kind of guy. He just isn't. We've seen this with streaming. He's more than willing to go to war with Hollywood over streaming and Windows and all that stuff. We've seen this with the Star Cruiser, totally different concept in themed entertainment. We're seeing it recently with story living, like you mentioned, with this residential community, completely different kind of, concept. His legacy, like you said, Dre, might be in these sort of ancillary things where it's not a park. It's a more innovative sort of approach to themed entertainment. That is probably going to be his legacy. Because, really, like Ron mentioned, all the other CEOs built new resorts or new parks.
Mm-hmm.
So would he really be cementing his legacy if he did the same thing that every other CEO did?
Right.
It's kind of like it kind of works against itself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's more of a milestone, but is it legacy? Is it will we forever remember it as being Chapek's or whatever in the same way as some of like the Galactic Star Cruiser, right? If that is successful, if that is a successful model that can be shipped out, like Chapek has had ambitions of that being shipped out to every single resort around the world, and that's where it starts. That is, I think that's far more attractive to him. And honestly, if that concept is successful and can be, rolled into, we were theorizing when we're talking about this Galactic Star Cruiser, right? Rolling that into different concepts that could incorporate that kind of template.
Right.
I think that's where it's at. I think that's where he would prefer his legacy to be. And it's interesting because Chapek has talked about like, if we're not chasing trends, or the company's going to die or whatever. I think is much more interested in like pivoting the Disney company into something that's diversifying their revenue streams, kind of getting their tendrils into other things that maybe you don't normally, you wouldn't immediately associate the Disney company with being, in being with, right? I think that's where he's going. And I don't sleep on the Marvel licensing. I think as a public legacy, as a legacy that people kind of attribute directly to him, that affects them. I think those Marvel rights, I think that's kind of where it's at. And it's interesting. I've had this conversation with a couple of people around these Marvel rights and what would it take and whatever. Think about if they did get those rights back and what kind of Marvel themed products and developments that we could get as part of that. What holds back Disneyland and some of these other parks from going big is because they can't invest the same level of investment in Walt Disney World and share those costs.
Right.
Man, if you get those rights, that would be a huge game changer.
It would be. It absolutely would be. And you already see Chapek making moves. You already see him making moves kind of in it's related but not. And what I mean by that is like, we've talked about how he's trying to bring, or he is bringing in the Netflix Marvel shows to, either Disney Plus or Hulu, right?
Right.
And that's kind of in the same vein as what you're talking about with the Marvel theme park rights, bringing all the Disney brands into the Mouse House.
Yes.
Basically creating this situation where the only place you can get this stuff is the Mouse House, whether it be on D+, Hulu, or Disney theme parks.
Right.
So getting the Marvel theme park rights, definitely it's in line with Chapek's kind of, approach so far.
I think it is. I think it is in line with his approach. And, we've seen some deals that we just never thought we would see, the like the Netflix shows coming on D+, the kind of the rights thing happening with Spider-Man and all that. We're seeing stuff. And I think Aaliyah even touched on it. We got to give her a shout out with Hulk and stuff.
Right.
Because those are technically Universal or Comcast rights, and in order to get those for Disney Plus, that's quite a big deal. I think going forward, especially in the theme park space, I think they might be working on getting those rights. I really do. It's the one thing that Bob Iger himself couldn't do. He couldn't get past it. He buys he acquires Marvel in 2009. And there were negotiations for years on the Marvel rights when it came to to Central Florida, and they were this close. They were this close to getting those rights from Universal, from Comcast, and it wasn't really. I mean, they had I think it was $1 billion in cash. It was going to be a lot, right? But the thing that held it up was actually the Oz Great and Powerful. That movie, that 2013 movie that came out. And to explain that is Universal was developing some Wicked concepts. I think they were either a movie or a series or whatever, and they really wanted to go big with Wicked. And one of the things that kind of was impeding them was the fact that Disney was developing its own kind of Wizard of Oz type franchise with the Oz Great and Powerful, right? Oh, we've got to be a franchise. But it was just if we develop these concepts, this is going to be in the way. This market's not going to, it might not hold these two concepts together. And they asked Iger, as part of these negotiations, to, one of the big sticking points was you have to kind of sideline this film completely. You have to put this in the can and never release it. and this was already in production. This was going out. It's Iger just he wouldn't budge. And that's what ended those negotiations right there. Movie comes out, doesn't do nearly as well as, as they imagined. And it was just dude, Marvel stuff, just the revenue alone from merchandise sold in Walt Disney World would have way trumped Oz Great and Powerful. Obviously, Marvel wasn't quite the juggernaut that it was. Avengers was just coming out,
Yeah.
But the potential was there. It's just and now it's gone to, Marvel stock has gone to the stratosphere, right? And so now that becomes a much different issue in 2022 than it was in 2013 or 2012 or whatever. But it's man, they were this close. And I think some of that has to do with ego, right? I don't think Bob Iger could go to those creatives and say, hey, this movie that you're working on that's going to come out, it's never going to see the light of day. I don't think he could have done that.
Yeah.
I don't, because he's an entertainment guy, he's so part of that world. I don't think he could stomach canning something like that, coming from that perspective. Whereas Chapek, you don't have no ego like that. He's very much a realist. Hey, you know what, ScarJo? I know some of your pay is predicated on a theatrical release. We're going to put it on Disney Plus anyway. Not work out that contract. That's Chapek.
Right.
He will do the things that are in the best interest of his company, no matter what anybody else thinks of him, and handle the fallout, on the back end. He'll not ask for permission. He'll ask for forgiveness. That's the difference between Iger and Chapek. And I think Chapek, any way to solidify his legacy would be do the things that the master couldn't do. And I think that might be one of them.
No, I think you're spot on with that. I think you're spot on. And really, it's kind of in, and I know a lot of people might disagree with this, but it's kind of in Universal's interest too, to sort of give those Marvel rights. Because from what I understand legally, Universal can really only work within the perimeters of what they got right now for the superhero island. So they can plus the current land, they can beautify and add to what they currently have, but it has to be within the confines of what they currently have. There's no way Disney's going to sign off on them building a new ride there. There's just no way. It's never going to happen. So that whole Marvel Island is a dead land. It's a dead end land. They can repaint it. They can make it look pretty. They can do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, nothing new will ever come to that land. So from Universal's perspective, hey, look, if I want to have something that we can constantly add to and plus and actually add new attractions, it might be best just to kind of forego the Marvel rights. And think about it. Even if you look into their, the most incredible attraction they have, which is a Spider-Man ride, which is award-winning, the most, this is the attraction that really put, Island Adventure on the map. But that same technology has been used already for other IP like Transformers.
Right.
So as long as Universal can find another IP that they can integrate that technology successfully, just as successfully as they did with Spider-Man, I think they're good. They're good.
I think they are. I mean, It's very interesting to tell you how bad those negotiations went. Like right after, uh, Universal announces, "Oh, we're gonna redo the footage. We're gonna redo the footage that's featured in Spider-Man to make it 3D and HD and all this kind of stuff, just as a kind of fu to kind of you could have had this, but now we're gonna double down kind of thing." You were exactly right about those rights, though. It's not an ideal situation, right? They are limited to how it's constructed right now. And like you said, they can paint. Actually, they have to paint. What's interesting is they have an annual review process where if Disney or Marvel or, I guess it would be Disney because of rights reverted. If Disney feels that those items that are featured in Superhero Island aren't up to show quality standards, legally they can revoke those rights. Yes. Wow. So every single year, Disney goes through with a fine-tooth comb and goes through every single part of that land. And, because if they find anything, that could be a potential legal battle. But Universal is very, very good about keeping that, spotless. But like you said, it is. And like we've said before on the show, it's Marvel of the 90s. It is becoming more stale and more stale and more stale. I was just having this discussion with one of our friends online, and he astutely pointed out, well, yes, you could have possibly made a deal, around this time had it not been for Epic Universe coming up, right? It's just less of a priority when you have a new park coming up. Right. But, and he was like, well, about 7 to 10 years is kind of where it buys them. And I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good assumption, but what is 7 to 10 years worth? Because when Epic Universe is done, you're going to have to come back to Islands of Adventure and take a look at that park, because some of that park is not as good as it can be, right? Right. How much is 7 to 10 years worth? How much is a redo of some of those islands, or maybe Superhero Island alone? How much is it worth to keep this? How much is it worth to keep this kind of thing going? Can there be something that is mutually beneficial for the both of them? Like, look, hey, they wanted to go Wicked. How much of the theme park rights to Wizard of Oz stuff is it worth to them? Right? Can we include that in the deal? I mean, Disney hasn't done anything with Wizard of Oz. I don't think they're ever going to, really. Right. They've owned those rights to everything outside of the MGM film since like the late 70s, 80s. They've owned those rights.
That Oz movie from like the 70s, I forgot the name of it.
Yes, Return to Oz, I think it was.
Yeah.
They just haven't done anything with them, and they've just held them. And it's like, well, if you're not going to do anything with them, and Oz, Great Powerful didn't beat out box office expectations, then just, hey, can we give those to you? That way, you would be completely you would have no there'd be no hindrance to establishing the Wicked world and going that route. Universal has wanted to go that route for a long time. They've never really gotten it going in the way that they imagined. But hey, give you those theme park rights, give you those kind of film rights to those other stories and so forth. Hey, Disney, Universal has a big problem with kind of cutesy characters and family fun entertainment. Right. Is there a franchise that Disney owns that you'd like the theme park rights for that we're never going to develop, right? I don't think they're ever going to develop an Ice Age attraction, for example. I don't think that's happening. But hey, could that fit within, one of your parks or right. Epic Universe itself? Like, I would have those kind of discussions and negotiations, because it's clear that as time goes on, the leverage of Superhero Island, it's not going to be good for both parties, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. You brought up a fascinating point about the Ice Age rights, selling that to Universal, because Universal does need that kind of cutesy IP.
Absolutely do.
Not just for the parks, but even just for like Peacock and their just overall library. That would have been such a power move. Like if Disney would have, because Disney just shut down Blue Sky Studios. If Disney would have said, hey, look, Comcast, Brian Roberts, we'll sell you Blue Sky. Give us the Marvel theme park rights. We'll give you the studio. And they can give you constant family-friendly stuff. Right. Instead of buying the glass of milk, you're buying the cow.
Yeah.
That would have been a brilliant move. You know,
I know. There are so many different ways this can go. There are so many different things that can be placed on the table, even streaming rights. You know, the streaming wars are big and heavy right now. Can we negotiate on that end? Can we have like a joint venture where we, I don't know, where we have, you know, Marvel product or Star Wars product or whatever on two different platforms at the same time, Peacock and Disney Plus or something, and you know, kind of have an exclusivity, or not an exclusivity, but kind of a joint shared deal for a period amount of time, and they revert back to Disney Plus. Like we can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like Blue Sky, given the whole studio, that would have been a good move. That would have been an awesome move. There are some ways to do that, and I think that kind of deal making, I think that really lights up Chapek's fire, and that right there, that's the legacy. That's where it's like, hey, I'm making moves in Hollywood kind of thing, versus I'm building another park or building another, you know, I don't know, theme park enterprise, which I've already done before.
Right. And those theme parks are risky. I'm telling you, we saw it with Michael Eisner, and I think Ron mentioned it even in this clip. You know, he mentioned how the Euro Disney or the Disneyland Paris thing didn't start off that great. I mean, they're still recovering from that whole debacle. These parks they're huge expansion opportunities, but they go south, and it can really taint the whole company.
I mean, Michael Eisner really he rethought the theme park thing right after Disneyland Paris opened. And it was such a momentous failure. It was such a, you know, they poured so much cash and effort into it that really, I mean, it could have put the company, the entire company at risk just because of the amount of investment. And I think Michael Eisner it was a cold splash of water where he realized, wow, you can really lose your shit on this. You know, I can't be as impulsive as maybe I believed myself I could be. You know, Tony Baxter talks about it too. Like before Disneyland Paris and before the quadruple bypass and Frank Wells, you can go to Michael Eisner and he basically just signed a dotted line, whatever you put in front of him. Whereas it was much harder to get those things approved later because, you know, Disneyland Paris was, I mean, it was so devastating. They took a big shot and it didn't quite pan out. And they're, like you said, they're still living with the repercussions today. You talk about Australia and how that might be a market. Well, yeah, a lot of theme park operators have tried investing in Australia, and almost all of them have failed, which is really interesting. And Disney did circle the tires on Australia back in the 90s. I mean, they really thought about doing something, and they developed the concept pretty good. And it was just, they just couldn't get around the fact that those other parks had fallen by the wayside, that tourism might not be enough to support, a park down under. And it's just kind of a tragic thing. Apparently Soarin' was birthed out of some of those ideas for that Australian park.
That's fascinating because like I mentioned earlier with the Australian concept, Australia has, it's not just a country, but it's almost like, I hate to even say this, but it's like it's a brand.
Continent?
Well, it's a brand. Well, it's continent, yeah, but it's like a brand. It's a lifestyle, kind of similar to California, right? Yeah. Like California isn't just a state. There's a lifestyle kind of element to it. There's a branding element to California, and Australia is very similar as a country, continent. You know, where it's that branding, it's that lifestyle, very unique. There's a lot of potential there, for a Disney resort, and you can really make it kind of tailored to that Australian brand, that Australian lifestyle. But wow, that's interesting about, a lot of theme park operators tried it and it didn't really work out. And that's probably why Disney is like, no, we're good. We're good.
No, and they developed it. I mean, they really went into it and really kicked the tires and say, in finding out not only was it feasible, but in developing the park as a whole. Like I said, soaring over California, I think it was birthed from those concepts of, because you could think hang gliding, it's like, yeah, that's totally Australian. They just redeveloped it for California, and did kind of an aerospace thing. But yeah, I mean, like that's I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's an interesting concept. Yeah, I don't know. You look at population rates though, and you look at tourism. I think that's why they keep going back to Brazil and India, because Brazil and India, India's just, I mean, it's got a billion people first
Right.
off. But second off, you have an emerging middle class. You have you do have some pretty good tourism, but the local market can really facilitate a park like that. Likewise with Brazil. Brazil is tough because the governments there are, they swing, and you have revolutions, and you have things that, in terms of economic investment, it's a little risky. It's a little bit riskier of an operation than say India with their relatively speaking, their stability. So that's kind of where it's at. But like I said, though, I mean, I'm with you on this, OG. I don't think necessarily, in the theme park space anyway, Chapek views his legacy as being another gate or another foreign resort or whatever. I think it's really like can we take the theme park idea and concept and really branch out into areas and ideas that that people just don't typically associate with Disney, and find new revenue streams. I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, that's legacy. That's the legacy right there. And Ron mentioned in this clip, he kind of excludes Disneyland Forward as part of, being part of that equation of like, well, it doesn't really count as a 30-year plan. I gotta disagree, because like we said in this video, it's not necessarily about the another gate. It's about these ancillary themed experiences, these revolutionary new ways of sort of incorporating that Disney experience. And Disneyland Forward is very much like that, like where it's going to really revolutionize, from what we've seen or heard so far, at least. They're going to have this mixed use theme park hotel space. It's going to be, they're going to have to get, Imagineering is going to have to get real creative in how they sort of, incorporate this stuff into this limited amount of room. Even Disneyland Forward, while technically, yes, it's a 30-year plan, phases of it can start now, though. It doesn't have to be like completed and done. It can be, started. And I think that could also be part of Chapek's legacy, depending on how well it does. If Chapek comes in, if the city of Anaheim approves Disneyland Forward and they start like phase 1 and it's a huge hit, let's just, let's just play devil's advocate here. Let's just, kind of go crazy. Let's just say the first phase of Disneyland Forward is like a Disney Sea level sort of expansion that creatively weaves in experiences like the Star Cruiser kind of thing, and the hotels and all this stuff. It's not a third gate. It might just be an expansion of DCA.
Yeah.
But something like that would drastically change the way fans perceive him.
Yes.
That would be a legacy kind of altering thing for a lot of fans. This would be a big deal for Disneyland. It would be a big deal for Chapek. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I think for Chapek himself, he does really, I mean, Dave did touch on it a little bit. He does need something to turn the perception around. Like, he does need something where it's like, okay, let me give one to the fans here. Shut them up. But really just to kind of just throw him a bone here. Just like say, hey, we haven't forgotten about you. This is not only going to be great for our, general audience, or our other guests that might not be as hardcore Disney as you guys, but it's going to be great for you. That kind of thing. I think he really needs to do, and I think that's why he's holding up public appearances until he can actually do that officially with some kind of big announcement. That's why. Like, I don't know if it's going to be this D23 Expo or some D23 Expo in the future, but I think what they kind of want to do is kind of, when they do have a big project in mind, when they do have a big project that's going, that is ready to be announced, have him attached to it by having him announce it. Not too dissimilar to how Bob Iger announced Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, for example. We're building 2. That became so meme-worthy. Do something like that, but have him be the face of it. So that way he's connected to something that's not so bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Have him be the face guy for something really big. Have him be the face guy for something really big. And whether that's going to be Disneyland Forward, whether that's going to be some other sort of, endeavor, whatever it is, it's important. That's very, very important. But it's interesting. This whole Chapek era is very, very interesting, because it's like, whether you're talking about Hollywood with the whole streaming thing and the very approach, with theatrical windows or direct to D plus, whether you're talking about that or whether you're talking about the theme parks, which are, story living, Star Cruiser, things like that. Chapek is we're starting to get an idea of what kind of guy, what kind of leader Chapek is. It's a very kind of like love him or hate him, kind of an outside the box kind of thing. And that doesn't mean, look, outside the box doesn't always mean good. I mean, you can think outside the box, it doesn't work, but he does seem to be that guy where he doesn't want to do just what everyone else kind of did in the past. He kind of wants to, chart, kind of do his own thing and pioneer some new ground. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be really interesting, really fascinating. He talks a lot about innovation. We want to be an innovative company. Innovation on his end has mostly been buying up other people's properties,
right,
and incorporating other people's ideas into the company. That's I don't think that quite qualifies as innovation, but innovative in the Disney sense, right? Innovative for Disney. I think that's kind of where he wants to be, and wants to be looked at as somebody who's I don't know, innovative in his own way, in bringing some of these ideas and concepts and rolling them out or having the Disney company execute them in the way that only Disney can. I think that's where he's at.
Yeah. And real quick on a final note, I want to discuss. You mentioned Chapek and his like strong desire actually to like kind of dive into this metaverse.
Yeah,
we've heard a lot about this with Zuckerberg, and he changed the whole name of his company.
Oh yeah,
to Meta.
Yeah, how's that stock doing, by the way?
Right? Right? Yeah, exactly. And Chapek, I've seen many interviews and press releases and whatever about Disney diving into this metaverse. What are your thoughts on that? We never talked about the metaverse. I mean, what are your feelings?
Never did talk about the metaverse. And that's because nobody really knows what it is. Nobody really knows how to talk about it. I don't know. I think the metaverse, I think there's an idea for the Disney experience, not just be limited for theme parks, right? Because Chapek has talked about, even in the last quarterly earnings call, he's talked about, well, it's a supply, the theme park industry is a supply limited business, right? Very supply limited. You can only build these parks so big. You only have enough land in which to do that. You can only add so many attractions. You get to a point where capacity is just capped. It's just capped. There's nothing you can do. That's just a hard value that you have to live by. Whereas Disney Plus is it's a limitless supply business, where it's just how much server space do you have? That's really your only limitation. And from then on, you can provide content to just about everybody on the planet simultaneously. So can we take that, but with a kind of themed experience or virtual experience? Like, can we take the theme park concept or the kind of the immersion of a theme park concept or space and take it virtually to where it is, supply limitless, right? And I think that's kind of that might be the kind of goal with the metaverse. Obviously, what do they call them? They call them what's the freaking tokens?
NFTs.
NFTs, yeah. Oh boy, that's a big thing right now. Obviously, these.
I'm too old for that shit. I have no idea.
It's just,
I'm so confused. But it's like
it's the worst part of the video game industry now, becoming a thing with just about every industry on the planet. Obviously you have people who sell sports merchandise or work in the sports world thinking NFTs are going to be the biggest thing on the planet. Obviously, video games have been doing it for a while. They're getting into that space. And I think that might also, too, be a motivation with the metaverse, right? If you can have a virtual space where you have these kind of deluxe or premium virtual experiences How do you do you outfit those spaces with NFTs that you own, that only you own, that people can see and interact with and stuff like that? That's really where that's going, right? It's another revenue stream.
Yeah.
But one that's not limited by capacity that you would have in a theme park setting. I mean, just as an idea, what if you could take Disneyland and completely virtualize it?
Right.
And charge maybe by the hour or something, or maybe like a monthly subscription to that service to experience Disneyland in the comfort of your own home. That kind of thing. I mean, even for a theme park fan, that kind of excites me. But you can kind of see where that kind of thinking might lie and where it could go.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. The sky's the limit. I mean, think of it like Wreck-It Ralph in the real world. How
exactly.
how Ralph when he went in Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet, he actually went into the internet. That's what this metaverse is. You're going to go basically into the internet. And what that means for Disney theme parks or Disney in general is limitless. Like you mentioned, like you can literally have a world where Disney can create a virtual theme park. They can sell you virtual merchandise. You can buy the virtual Spirit jersey. You can change your avatar.
NFTs.
Right? Exactly. I mean, and they can charge you real money for this stuff. And it's limitless. It's a whole other industry. I mean, it's like, it could be a potential cash cow for them if they do it right. So we'll see how that works out. That's the caveat.
You're right. It's all in theory that this thing is going to really break out. Like, did anybody see Ready Player One?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's a little bit of a dystopic version, but what if everybody just kind of like the metaverse becomes the world in which they inhabit every single day, right? And we've seen kind of stuff like this with like WoW when that was super popular. I mean, I remember my brother playing WoW, and I mean, he would dedicate his entire life around it. He would dedicate times in which to raid and all that kind of stuff. It's just crazy. But when it comes to the Disney metaverse, if that thing is really going to bust out, if it's really going to be groundbreaking and breakthrough and really be as popular as some people theorize that it could be, do you want to be behind that 8 ball or ahead of it? That's kind of where Chapek's at.
Yeah, and that's really it. Really does kind of show what kind of executive he is. He is not a coattail rider at all. He's probably just as innovative as Bob Iger in that regard. Forward thinking. Yeah. But without all the charm and charisma. Obviously, but he definitely has that sort of mindset of like, we can't be Disney circa 1977. We have to be on the forefront of all these new technologies. We got to constantly evolve our brand or we're going to die,
Yeah. And Chapek Bob Iger was really big into that. Bob Iger was like, hey, you know what? My industry of television went through an enormous change when I first started. And, some studios and stuff, they were behind the 8 ball when it came to that, when it came to, cable, kind of premium on-demand content and all that. The television industry changed from Bob Iger's time in it. And he was always very strict about like, hey, look, you want to be ahead of innovation rather than behind it. You really want to be, and Disney was just never nimble enough to be as innovative as I think Bob Iger wanted it to be. And Chapek's like, nah, like we're going to be a nimble company. I think that's why he's, he kind of used the pandemic in a way to do that, to become more nimble and flexible. But that's kind of where Chapek maybe one step ahead of Bob Iger in that, hey, if you're going to chase trends or if you're going to change with the marketplace, you have to have a more nimble and flexible company. And I'm going to do that no matter what. And the panty kind of fell into his lap and allowed him the ability to do that and trim a lot of the extra fat that may have been holding them back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even like in the video game industry, like I'm a huge Nintendo guy. I grew up, I'm not so much a gamer anymore, but like when I was growing up, I was a youngster in the 80s, and I was all about Nintendo. I was all about Super Nintendo. I got the Sega Genesis. I had the Game Gear, all that stuff. I was all into the gaming, right?
Wait, hang on.
What was that?
There you go.
There was a point in time though where Nintendo was sort of and right now Nintendo is doing fantastic. They're a very, very strong brand. But there was that little window of time where that transitioning period was occurring between like the cartridges and the CD or the DVDs or whatever they call them, right? And Nintendo kind of dug its heels in, and they didn't really want to do the whole like CD thing. They were really it was tradition. It's the cartridges. It was the cartridges. And they really let kind of PlayStation and these other kind of companies sort of, not take control, but sort of kind of, gain ground because of that. Because they were so stuck in what it used to be. They didn't innovate. Now, Nintendo has come out of that, and they're very strong right now.
Oh, yeah.
But that's just kind of an example of how if you dig your heels in too much to the nostalgia and you don't move forward, it can be a detriment to your overall business.
Well, I mean, think about, if we want to stay in the video game space and we talk about Wreck-It Ralph, right? The arcades to the consoles. Right. I mean, arcades used to be huge back in the 80s. Back in your time, OG. No, joke.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing. That was a huge source of revenue. You had all kinds of arcade machine developers putting out games and so forth for these arcades and stuff like that. And once the consoles kind of came out, which Nintendo helped spearhead a lot, with Atari and everything else, that became a business by which maybe you are supplier capacity limited to now we can just produce consoles for distribution all across the planet and really have no limit, the limit just being production. And that's the kind of shift in the market that was huge that took the arcade industry by surprise, as we saw elaborated in Wreck-It Ralph and as Nintendo has successfully capitalized on, right?
Right.
You don't want to be behind when that kind of a shift happens. So at what point do you invest in things that could be revolutionary but might not be? How much do you invest? How much do you pour in to getting those things established? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's finding out right now that you might have an idea of where you're going, but you have shareholders to follow back on. And I think the metaverse, as Mark Zuckerberg has touted it, I think he said it won't be profitable for 10 to 15 years
God.
or something. Just this way long thing, and it's we need returns now, kind of thing.
Or at least within a reasonable amount of time. I mean, that's 15 years is crazy. Even the streaming wars, these companies understand it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years maybe. But you're talking 15 years. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it might even be that figure might be inaccurate. I haven't looked at. I'm just remembering numbers off the top of my head. That might be inaccurate. Might be longer.
Wow.
And it's it's just, that's a lot of money to sink into for something that might turn into something later. That's going to be something that Chapek, obviously needs to kind of balance, right? But you can kind of see hey, arcades used to be a thing and now they're not. When the internet took over, in the e-commerce space, think about how much it's changed our life even in the last 3 years. Right. I mean, things that you wouldn't think imaginable, hey, I can get McDonald's delivered, through this third party. How does that work,
Right.
And you can kind of see how these industries change. Now, you have to be careful because, and that goes into the D+ conversation, right, with the shareholders and their view of Disney stock, because Peloton, right, was one of these companies that really took off during the pandy as people were locked in their homes and kind of people were working on themselves and had nothing else to do, right? But Peloton wasn't able to extend that success out. And that's really what's gotten them into trouble, right? Whereas Disney has been able to successfully, keep subscribers on Disney Plus, leverage their content in a way that no other, even Netflix can, right? Netflix can't add a I don't know the Witcher ride in Netflix land, right? They can't do that, right? But Disney can,
right?
With the Mandalorian and anything else, they can leverage their brands in a way that other studios cannot. They can do all this kind of stuff. So Disney's been quite successful in doing this. historically, and they've been quite successful in kind of, balancing their existing revenue streams and also with emerging revenue streams. And when it comes to theme park space, like we said before in the show, that's where Chapek is. That's where he's going. That's where he feels his legacy is. And I think he's right on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely concur with you. Now, one scary thought that came into my mind, and I don't think this is happening anytime soon. Soon. But you mentioned like arcades kind of became obsolete. I can't even find an arcade anymore. I don't even know what it would be at anymore. I mean, they're gone, when consoles came on. It's a scary thought to think of, but like when you're dealing with like the metaverse and virtual theme parks, is there a day when the physical theme parks, which would be the arcade, basically, fall to the wayside, become obsolete because the virtual theme parks are so much more compelling and changeable and adaptable? Ooh, scary thought. I don't want to think about it, but it's a possibility,
I think this will put your mind at ease, though. With the arcade space, right? You're talking about physical joysticks affecting things on screens, right? That's a pretty easily translatable thing from somewhere where you go to something you can have in your home.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Theme parks are completely different. I think, it was some of the Imagineers working on Rise of Resistance actually said it, where it was like, guests want physicality. Guests want the physical thing. They want to see that AT-AT in a physical space and look up and be completely awestruck by it, right? They were kind of taking shots at Universal for being so screen heavy at that time. Universal's changed course, good for them. But the physical space, walking through an environment that is, not through the looking glass of a virtual reality headset, I think has its own unique appeal and will always be appealable. As far as how much that's worth, as far as, who really seeks those things out, it's always going to be an open question, but I think they'll always have a market. I think those things will live on. I think they will be eternal, as long as that physical space is of high quality, by which you really can't even approach in a virtual reality space.
Yeah. Oh man, fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. I do want to thank you, Dre, for coming on today. I do appreciate it, brother. And I also want to thank Fresh Baked Podcast for that clip. I mean, it was really an interesting conversation. I really wanted to kind of break it down and expand upon it because it was fascinating. But it is, you can go through so many different, like my brain goes down the rabbit hole with this whole concept. It's wild.
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. We started talking about legacy, and now we're off in virtual reality. Look, it is a fascinating conversation. I think with Chapek specifically, it's really fascinating what he considers to be legacy worthy.
Right.
Like to get in that headspace. I mean, I always thought to just give you an idea. I always thought like Tom Brady. The quarterback for the Patriots, the New England Patriots, and then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Apparently, he's retired. We'll see. But I always thought, the Super Bowl in which he beat the Atlanta Falcons down 28-3, goes back and beats them. I always thought, like, that's the legacy, right? That's the GOAT. Like, that's the thing. But he kept on, Obviously, that wasn't good enough for him. And Chapek, similarly, to bring it back here, it might not be enough. It might just he might be just looking to solidify his legacy. He might not be quelled, so to speak, with maybe what we would attribute to him as legacy worthy. So it's going to be fascinating.
It will. And I want to give an analogy, but I don't want anyone to have any kind of misinterpretation. I do not think Chapek is Walt Disney. I don't want to give anyone misinterpretation, and
I don't think he's Tom Brady, just to let you know.
Yeah, exactly. But like in my analogy here with like, you could honestly make the argument like after Snow White, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's Walt Disney's legacy. Like, the first animated feature, that's the legacy, right?
Right.
But it wasn't. 1955, he came through with the theme park, and that drastically changed everything. Like, there's always a wild card. You never know, and that's kind of what we're saying here is like there could be something else, some different angle, some different approach that Chapek's going to go in, and it's not going to be what his predecessor did. So it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Hey, when Bob Iger unveiled Disney Plus, I don't think he really thought of it as being really that legacy worthy, right? When really, honestly, the launching of Disney Plus at the time they did, really kept the company afloat and kept that stock price high and kept them from being acquired and, did all these kind of legacy worthy things. You just never know. You just never know, what might pop up and to get attached to this notion of, well, what does he think is legacy worthy? Hey man, I think Chapek's, I think he's on the next best thing, and maybe something legacy worthy will come out of it. So it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be fascinating. We're here for the ride. Dre, thank you so much for coming on, brother. If you can let everybody home know where they can find you on social media.
Best place to interact with me on social media is at Twitter, at VashGuy. It's right down there, just like it's spelled. Very interesting conversations that I've been having recently with some people, so it's been very, very fun. Feel free to reach out. And the best place to see me is on the channel you're watching right now, Orange 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And thank you all so much for watching. This is a fascinating conversation we had today in regards to legacy, Bob Chapek, Disney's Metaverse. Again, like I said earlier on in the video, I will be linking the Fresh Baked Podcast video that we referenced today in the description down below. So you can definitely check them out. Fascinating stuff. But again, thank you all so much for watching. Comment down below with all your views, all your opinions on this. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Yeah.